And not only that, they need to have it written down and they need to have it agreed on throughout the organization. Because, if you just have it in someone's head, the lottery is probably more apt to happen than getting hit by a bus. That person could just not be there one day and then you're hooped. So it's so important to have that written down.
Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Membership Org podcast. I'm joined here today by an extra special guest. He is an individual, actually, I started working with when I first started with Bursting Silver. He showed me the ropes, taught me everything I know, and then some too. Very fortunate to have him on the podcast here today. Welcome, Des Hymers.
Thanks, Riley. Glad to be here.
Well, happy to have you as well. I know you're a busy man, so it was great to be able to get you down and have you contribute to the podcast here, especially on such an important topic like data migration and migrations in general. They can be pretty messy and scary. And so it's nice to have an expert at the helm who can tell us the ins and outs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe before we get started, how about for our audience that haven't experienced your expertise on a call before or haven't had the chance because they haven't lit things on fire yet and needed that special touch from Des to jump on. Tell the listeners here who you are and how you got to where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the IT industry since like the early 2000s. And I started kind of working with affiliate marketing in the social space. So think like early days of like Friendsters, MySpace, all that fun stuff before, what we have today. And then I moved into a junior developer role at BSI about almost 20 years ago. It was quite a learning curve and needed to just get some stability. So that's, why I chose BSI and the not-for-profit space. And then, I've just been honing my skills over the years as a developer, and as a consultant, and working more on the business as well. And then I've moved into some leadership roles, working on mentorship, working with individuals like yourself, bringing them up into the organization, showing them what consulting is, more importantly, what it is to BSI, because I think we kind of have our own unique flavor on it. We're not the Deloittes and the NMPs of the world, so I want to make that distinction. And then I had an opportunity to join the partnership, and then it's just been that ever since. For the last about 5 or 6 years, I've been really focusing on our regulatory bodies that we have within our organization and helping them, doing these upgrades, implementing new features, working with them with AI nowadays a lot too. And then I've also been working with our unions and our professional associations, and kind of alluded to it. I get called in when something starts on fire and they need a helping hand. So it's been a lot of fun.
That expert touch.
Yeah.
So your official title as a solution architect, from a dev perspective, they're like, oh yeah, solution architect. But can you maybe explain in a layman's terms what a solution architect actually does, and especially relating to our topic here, how that would be seen in a migration or an upgrade process?
Yeah, well, a solution architect kind of works with the client, with the business, as well as, our technical people and our BAs, and we help bridge the gaps, or at least that's what my role is, because I need to understand what the client is doing, what their goals are of their system, where they want to be, and then I need to help translate that in for our devs and our BAs, and it's planning. It's a lot of future planning. We don't just sit there and we're not writing code. We're helping understand where the data needs to flow into, where it's coming from. We need to make sure the structures are in place for future changes down the road, because we all know systems don't stay the same, and we need to kind of do a little future proofing. So that's where we come in. And as far as migrations come into play, we need to work with the business to understand where the data is coming from, make sure we get it in the right structures for where it's going to end up in iMIS. We need to make sure that these are repeatable, because our end goal of an implementation, regardless of what it is or what system it is that go live. So if we aren't making these repeatable from the very beginning, and we're not strategizing from the very beginning, it's going to fail, or it's going to be, be very uncomfortable for the client and obviously for ourselves too. But it's just making sure those processes are in place and that everyone understands the steps to get there. So that's more or less what I do when it comes to implementation and specifically data migration.
Yeah, it's that knowing what needs to get done right now and why it needs to get done this way so you're ready for the future. And I think that kind of calls into as well. You have organizations that have been working in their systems for so long, and they see a new system. It can get confused often that it's as simple as picking up the data and dropping it into a shiny new tool. How do you think that assumption translates from a leadership perspective who thinks that's the move, and when you would come in and tell them how it works?
Well, I think the people who think that it's just a system upgrade, it's very technical. What we need to step back and think about, and this is why I'm fortunate enough to help our organizations, is I understand that it's not. Everyone has their own business, and the business drives the tech. And as you're on a platform, regardless of what it is, I really, it does not matter. It could be Salesforce, it could be SharePoint, it could be iMIS, it could be Dynamics. They don't matter. The longer that you're on that system, you kind of slowly move away from that gold standard because your business changes. You think about a regulatory body, they get new requirements from the board, or in some cases, the federal government, that directly impact how their business works. And then they have to take that business requirement, they have to adapt their tech stack or their technology to fit that need. And over the years, you just kind of get further and further away. So treating a system upgrade as just technical, I don't think that's the right way. It's a chance for an organization to look at their business, how they operate within the system, improve efficiencies, remove that technical debt, and actually make it better for their staff, and more importantly their members. And I think that's what they need to do. And that's how I look at it, and that's how I encourage my clients to look at it too.
I think that's part of the exercise some people dread, but it's a holistic exercise to improve along the way, shake off the old and in with the new. Uh, and a lot of that also translates into data. So looking at this
Yeah.
concept of dirty data and the data cleanup exercise that can be pretty arduous or cumbersome for moving into a new system. But I may be speaking that because I've seen it before. For an organization that hasn't gone through this process, why would dirty data cause so much pain on a migration?
Well, I mean, if you think you started, we've got some organizations that are quite old. We've got some that are 20 years old, and they started with, like, on paper. They had the big filing cabinets, and they modernized. They start moving those filled out paper records into digital ones, and then over the years, that data, it keeps getting migrated into these new systems, and their business processes change, and all this new tech comes out that's supposed to make their lives easier, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's all affecting that data. And each time you go through an iteration of that, you just kind of, it's changing. And so we see a lot of stuff, like address data. Man, address data is like the the easiest to collect and probably the worst for every organization I see. Everyone's got a typo somewhere. They're missing postal codes, or the postal code doesn't match the right city. Um, and the longer you are and collecting that data, the more it's going to get. And you have to go through these processes of cleaning it up, tightening it up. Another one is that I love, that I see this all the time, is somebody needs specific calculation, can do it in their system, so they do an export to Excel. Now we've got these spreadsheets that have these specific data points. They're not connected to the system. They're not live, you know? And then, Joan down at the front desk, she goes and starts updating that spreadsheet because it's easier than using the system. Now we've got this really disjointed data, right? So that's where we start seeing it being dirty, and it's hard to move because, one, you don't know about it, right? Everyone forgets about Joan at the front desk sometimes, but she does a wonderful job. Need to buy her flowers occasionally, but it's hard to keep track of that, and it's just so easy to do. It's
Shout out to the
yeah,
Jones of the world. I mean,
right,
the duplicating the data just gave me sweaty palms. And it's funny too, when you see that in real time from affecting an organization, one thing that's often overlooked is it's just an address, but it could be an address that's then tied to a tax code. And if those are inconsistent, people aren't getting charged the right tax. We've seen that with some clients in the past.
right. You go to some people, some organizations still mail out letters. If this data, they had their mailing address in their old system in some spot, but when it got migrated over, it got pulled from a different area. All of a sudden, you can't, send a mail to that person. Maybe it's something to do with their license being expired, or something that's going to affect their livelihood. They need to have that information. So it's very easy that, have all these different little data points, and that you got to tighten them up and validate them. And, every time we go do a migration for a client, we've got these new tools that we can leverage to help validate that. And it's not just address data. You think about, it's another good one, statuses. As a member has a life cycle, they have all these different statuses, and they have an effective date and an end date. And if those aren't aligned, well, they could get in a little hot water depending on the regulatory body they're part of. So it's very important to make sure that's all in line. And then if it's not, a migration's a great time to clean that up. It's a pain in the butt, but you have to do it. So
Yeah, big time. So in an efficiency stake, you have an organization that hasn't even started it, but they want to be proactive in ensuring that they're not running into this the time that it comes to migration. What would be some areas that they can look into to start this process of cleaning up their data, or where have you seen maybe the quick wins or the ones that make the largest impact that they could be proactive about?
no, it's address data again. It's always bad. I don't care which organization or which system you're using. You've got maybe probably 20% that's really good. Those are your core members, and then you've kind of got the ones that you hear from once in a while, and their data's wrong. I can guarantee it. And, you might not be cleaning them up at that time before you implement the system, but maybe you flag them, right? And then as part of the migration, you say, we know these records that have this flag are going to be garbage. Let's validate their address. And there's Google, there's Smart Streets, there's a whole bunch of these tools out there that we can leverage now that are quite fast and actually, don't cost that much anymore. Whereas, years ago they would be very expensive. Another great one is, again, we talked about Joan and her spreadsheets. Start collecting those. Start having understanding of where they're all at, because each department has probably 3 or 4 that they're using that, only 1 or 2 people in that department know about. But well, you need that data point. Don't go talk to Dave. He's got it. Well, it's because Dave has it in a spreadsheet and it's not in the main system. So you have to get that all collected, or at least have an understanding of where all these different sheets are, because it'll bite you.
And I always think it's a fun pattern too. You don't have to go in line by line and update everything
No,
manually. You can tie it to a function that translates a lot of these inconsistencies to something more consistent. That's one of the beautiful parts of a migration when you're doing that modernization
absolutely.
piece. You're out with the old, in with the new. You can translate things to be where they need to be in the new state.
Yeah, it's not like, whenever we're dealing with migration, I'm working with my clients and my techs. I always say, this thing needs to be repeatable. It needs to be scripted. You have the data in this one area. It has to flow through this pipeline or whatever it is, and and then you can put in your checkpoints. Say you want to validate address. We put an address validator as part of, step 3. And it'll go and it'll either flag those records or it'll clean it up. Or, addresses you don't want to do too much to mess around with, because they are tricky, and we want the members to be confirming those. In some cases, it is quite easy just to clean it up, but it's different for each organization. But it's important that you don't have to do it line by line, like you said, right? You can put scripts in, you can put these different processes in, and as long as you have that repeatable process, it's going to do the same thing each and every time. So if you keep adding a little bit each time, you're going to get some really good, clean, validated data on the outside of it.
Hey guys, Riley sliding in here mid-podcast to let you know about something that we have going on the website for free that actually relates to what we're talking about here. So for those of you that are listening that are on iMIS 2017 and currently not sure on what next steps are needed to be able to be cloud ready, or you're looking to upgrade and you just want some clarity on what that takes, well, we put together the EMS upgrade playbook that helps provide a roadmap in 14 easy pages across 4 phases with nice checklists, so you know what every step of the way involves on your upgrade and modernizing journey. So if this sounds like you, I've put that link in the show notes and it can be available to you for free. Walk through with your team and see if you're cloud ready. Now, everybody else, let's get back to it. Yeah, and I think that kind of leads into my next point I wanted to ask you about, because you look at this as a process. If you keep thinking that you have to update it manually every time, just repeating that can inflate the amount of work that goes into it. And these migrations, they can be tricky. Sometimes they go sideways. In your experience, what do you find the most common hidden balloons that have ever happened that were those like sleeper agents, so to speak, or weren't disclosed beforehand, and they've ended up really impacting your migration process?
The biggest ones are the Joan spreadsheet. We've talked about it a few times, but because we just, as an implementer, we don't know where those are at, right? It's your staff that do, and they use them, and they have these processes. So it's really good to engage your staff early. You know, talk about how you're going to be moving it, why you're going to be moving it into a new system. Reviewing your SOPs. We want to make sure that the staff understand that and how it's going to affect their day to day, because we always talk, oh, we want to have your subject matter experts. Well, it's good to have those, but those ones typically aren't the ones that have the spreadsheets. They're not the owner of them. It's the two or three rungs down the ladder that have them. So it's good to talk about it as a company as a whole, so you can get that information, because you run two-thirds through a project. Somebody finally gets their eyes on it for testing, and they're like, oh, well, we're missing this data point. Why aren't you capturing it? You backtrack, and it's like, oh, it was in Joan's spreadsheet, that's why. So it's good to kind of capture that as best you can. You're not going to get it all. It's just how we work as people. So, and then the other big one that I see quite often is, like I said, we like to script this data. We like to script it. That way it's repeatable. But then when we change the source, we get new data and we find it all the time. But when you've got, like your name records and your address data that's signed off and approved, but when you start changing that structure two-thirds through the project, well, then we have to start all over again. Or we have to go back and fix a bunch of these, and we get false positives. The dev team wonders why their data isn't coming in. The BAs or the QA who's testing the forms are like, oh, we had this data, now it's missing or it's incorrect, and we've got calculations that are wrong at the back end. And it's just this kind of waterfall of unpleasantness that just balloons costs and timelines, and doing a migration is stressful enough. So you start adding that on top of it, and it gets a little hairy.
Yeah, I feel like I've been in that QA spot flagging up. Where'd that go?
Yeah.
I thought we had
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for other items too, I know we focus a lot on data. It's the title of the talk here, but we also look at migrations, and I think variables that often get overlooked would be custom configurations as well. You highlighted earlier about organizations that have been in a system for so long, they have grown with it and probably have made their own fixes and whatnot. So in your experience, maybe you could highlight when those have been encountered or when those have been discovered during a migration process. How do those complicate that upgrade, and how do you handle those with the client or the stakeholders or whoever you're working with?
Well, typically when we start dealing with these one-off or the custom code or the configurations is when we're expecting data to flow a certain way or a system to work a certain way, and it doesn't. And then when we're moving to this new system, our assumptions are wrong, right? And we need to make sure that everyone understands that what they are. So when our assumptions are wrong, that's when we start seeing delays and stuff, and it's really really causes headaches on our side, which in turn causes headaches on the client side, right? Because they have budgets and timelines, and when we don't meet those, it's unpleasant. And it starts, the older the system is, the more we see these too. So you keep adding on to it, you keep adding on to this system. And previously, before all of our SaaS products, it was really easy just to do some one-offs and make some custom SQL or some code. And now we have to try and match that, but generally you can't, or maybe in some cases you shouldn't, right? Again, I've talked about making sure you understand your SOPs and all this. That's really good to make sure you understand your SOPs, because when you're moving into the new system, you want to try and avoid all those custom work, because just you're already starting that technical debt.
And so that's important too. Sorry to cut you off, but that's why, as a solution architect, you would come in too, and you'd be able to evaluate those things that are important, what you can keep, or what maybe down the road doesn't match those SOPs as you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to have that forethought, because we know that things are going to change, and if we can make the system as out of the box as close as we can without leveraging this custom code, you're going to just remove that technical debt. And then we start talking about custom configurations, about why we put them in there is because the system didn't quite work the way we wanted. So generally, maybe some of these were like added very quickly because of deadlines and such. and we look from a data migration point, if it was put in there quickly, maybe they just put all their data types as, bar charts. So just you can put anything you want in them. But really that field, it needs to be a number. But over the years, you've added a whole bunch of other data in those fields. So then when you tell us, oh, this is a number field, that's all we ever going to accept in it, and we start getting all these weird types, and we have to clean it up. We have to discuss with you, are these values actually needed? Do they need to go somewhere else? And now we've just added a layer onto that migration piece, which happens all the time, and it's fine. But it's the result of these, one-off workarounds and configurations and stuff like that.
Yeah. And hopefully those are caught. Like I highlighted earlier, being on the QA side, that's something that why we test and why testing is important.
Yeah.
Because those things come out in the process where you make those judgment calls on if they're a quick fix or not. And so for testing then, when it comes to running these old and new systems side by side before you switch over, what does good testing look like? Because I know what good testing look like, but for a listener here, when they're looking for maybe best practices or a standard, what should they be looking for in good testing on a migration?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's something that's super important. A lot of people think that it's just on the side of the implementer to do. It's not. Having our clients in their testing is so key, not only because they know their business, they know what their members are doing, they know those edge cases, and that's what you need to be testing. You need to be testing it against the real world and using real data. When we're doing our migration before we go live, we're actually using real client data, because that's what needs to be in the system. We mask emails and everything, and to make sure we don't have any notifications slip out, as all good implementers are. It doesn't matter the system, it's still possible. But you need to be testing that real life data, not just test data. A lot of times we'll put in some fake data, some test data. That test data is generally meant to pass the test. It's not meant to what could be in a member's record. If we, going back, I talked about around statuses and effective dates. If your effective dates in your old system weren't correct, and then they're off by like a month or a day, and we're using those to do calculations in the new system, which is very common. If you've got, say 20% of your members where it has kind of odd, weird data in there, and you don't do a good wholesome test throughout your whole data set, you're not going to catch those, and your members are. And your members are going to be like, what the heck? Right? So it's good to make sure you have a good sample size. And the clients, they know their members, they know their data really well. They really do. They know their business. So if you say, pick out your problem kits, test with those records, not just test with the happy path. You're going to find a lot. Hopefully not a lot, but you're going to find some things. And I always get excited when I start seeing, right? And I always get excited when people start submitting bugs, right? I love it when I see bugs, because that means it's being tested. So it's software. It always has issues. So as long as there's bugs, that means people are using it, they're testing it. It's great. It's even better when the bug's repeatable, because then I can fix it. But yeah, no, it's great, right? And when your staff are in there, yeah, and when your staff are testing, they're making sure that it is being calculated and validated properly, and it's working fluidly.
And I think a really important part there too, when you're talking about testing, going in, finding bugs, that people are testing it. It's also important to know that people are learning the system too, because there's one thing that I think is often overlooked is when you're adopting a new system, the changes to people's workflows, staff's workflows, they're in a new environment, at a new desk here, in a new digi-desk. Being able to test is also being able to practice in a sandbox and learn how the system works. So I think that's an important thing, that instead of highlighting it as a vetting the system, you're also using it as experiencing what you're adopting.
Absolutely, right? It should be part of your change management, right? Your staff are learning the system. They know how the old system works, but they need to know about the new system. When members have issues, they're going to be phoning in. Your staff are the ones that are going to be helping them. So the better understanding that they have of the system and, the quirks of the system, because every system has quirks. You can't sugarcoat that. It's going to help them help your members, right? And that's all that happens is through testing, and lots of testing. We always kind of short our testing a little bit, thinking everyone's going to do their job and the system is great and all that other good, wonderful sales stuff. But every time I've seen a project have skirted the testing, it's just been longer issues, post go live. And and then you talk about the change management stuff. Like I know you and James Harrison talked about that quite a bit. And it's getting your staff seeing it early and often. So it's not such a surprise when, the cutover happens and everyone's live and they have to go into work one day with, like you said, their new digi-desk. And if they know the system, they're familiar, it's going to be so much smoother. And again, all by testing. Or one of the ways is through testing. I mean, I could talk about change management all day long, and I have in some cases, but we'll save that for another one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm mindful of time too, because I'm sure we could talk about testing and change management till the cows come home. So to round off our conversation today, usually I like to put on the frame of a leader at an organization. This one, I will say that I'm looking at a new potential system eventually. It's not in the pipeline yet, but if I were looking at getting started and I wanted to start doing 2 or 3 things now to ease into that process, so it's set up to be more effective, more successful, cheaper, faster, stronger, better, less stressful, those things, what should I be looking at doing now with my team and my system?
Well, this goes back to our SOPs, right? Again, the business drives the tech. You need to make sure that your staff understand all their SOPs, how they're supposed to be doing their job, why they're supposed to be doing their job. It just makes it that much easier. And they have to have that clear understanding of how it operates. And then if they don't have a clear understanding, they can't tell their implementer of what the system's supposed to do. And not only that, they need to have it written down and they need to have it agreed on throughout the organization. Because, the lottery is probably more apt to happen than getting hit by a bus. So, that person could just not be there one day and then you're hooped. So it's so important to have that written down and understanding. And then that all relates back to why you do things. Why is data stored in a certain location? Why do the forms flow this certain way? It all relates down to that SOPs, right? And how the business operates. So to me, that's key.
Couldn't have said it better. Well, Des, thank you so much for jumping on the call here. I appreciate all of your insights and expertise. If anybody wanted to reach out and kind of talk to you more about SOPs, data migration, or all those things lovely in the solution architect world, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, and if they've talked to me before through email and that, they've already got my email, my phone number's there too. So it'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. We'll catch you on another episode.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right, that's a wrap. This is Riley from the Modern Membership Org podcast. Speaking on behalf of Bursting Silver, thank you for listening, and thanks to Des for jumping on, giving us his expertise on data migration and data management. If you enjoyed this and you want to hear some more, please consider subscribing on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to your podcast. We are there, and we will catch you on the next episode next week.